So not only will the members in our audience be able to ask questions as we go through the presentation this evening, but we will also be taking questions for those of you that are joining us through the internet. And so we have Daniela, who will be taking all of your questions and also just available if you wanted to share some thoughts or also ask questions either of myself or of the panel. And I'd also like to introduce you to our first member of the panel, which is Rose M. Kelly, and I'd like to have her share her background, and she is AICP, so congrats to Rose. But I'll introduce you now, and she can share her story.
Oh man, this crazy microphone. Hi, I'm Rose. I got my AICP 6 months ago now. I'm a San Diego native, but I got my master's in city and regional planning at Cal Poly in 2016. Knew I always wanted to go to sit immediately as I could. And back in those days, the candidate program wasn't around yet, so I applied. The first day it opened that June, gave up my summer, studied a bunch, got really mad I didn't get a 70, but passed anyway. Yeah, I've been working for 3 years. I work at DUDEC, which is a San Diego-based company. I do mostly climate adaptation planning, just for noise element, so all around, and then some CEQA in my prior life. So yeah, that's me.
Hey guys, I'm Maria. I passed my AICP test a year and a half ago now. I have a master's degree in urban planning from Arizona State University. I actually graduated a while back ago in 2009. Not the best time for a planner to graduate with real estate market collapse, so that actually took me off track. I didn't have a job in the industry for a few years. I always wanted to pass the test, but I didn't have the experience, so took it 2 years ago. I felt confident enough. I was ready to take it and don't regret it. I also took the November test. I know I wouldn't be able to study during Christmas with the holidays, so I just sacrificed the summer, did it, passed the first time.
Use that picture of me on the scooters. That's always fun. So, my name is Mike Shankman. I am the only non-AICP up here because I'm on the candidate program. Full disclosure, I chose to do it during a time of summer and all that. This is my second time sitting for it, which I will be here soon. The first time I did not pass, and keep in mind, I am, as I was saying, my background is from UCSD, graduated summa cum laude, degrees in sociology, urban studies and planning, went on to do a master's at USC, where I did my master's in public administration and planning, economic development. I've worked with Civic San Diego, I do consulting in affordable housing, and I was super arrogant and I did not pass the first time out. So study, make sure you study. But I am, like I said, part of the candidate program, and here we are.
Awesome. So you can see that our team is comprised of some folks that have a lot of experience with the AICP. I think one of the important things to take into consideration just in general is that becoming AICP is a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. It's something that you have to make a commitment to do. And I think we all generally feel like we're good planners, right? We get up out of our beds every day. We try to make the world a better place with our different roles and responsibilities throughout the course of the day. And then at some point in our careers we decide it's time to become AICP, right? And then we have to make a commitment, and like any commitment, right? It's a matter of thinking about it. It's a matter of also putting together a plan and dedicating as much as you can to be able to have a successful outcome. And I think that every one of us up here has a different experience because we're all different people, right? And there's this thing called life that happens, as you're trying to do things in life, things happen and come along the way. And so I think it's a reflection of, as we hear Rose, as we hear Maria and Mike, we all are different people. Life is different for each of us. And I'd like to have you really think about that as you undertake this journey of becoming AICP. There's not one way of becoming AICP, and there's not just like the 10 automatic steps that are going to get you there. It's going to be some trials and tribulations, and it's also going to be a different formula for each and every one of you. So keep that in mind. And we certainly are hoping that you'll get a lot out of the session today. Know that we're all a lifeline for you. The contact information is on the PowerPoint presentation, which we'll share with everybody who hasn't already received it. But I think one of the important things to know is that you're not alone as well, right? So we're a testament of the fact that you can actually do this and become AICP, and we're happy to serve as a lifeline to you in our various capacities with each of our different stories. And tonight, we're going to try to, take a chunk of the information that is overwhelming, I think. If any of you have looked at the APA National website, there's, a whole series of web pages that are dedicated to becoming AICP. And we're going to try to give you a snapshot of what that is so that you don't feel as overwhelmed when you go to APA National and as you prepare to undertake this journey. And so now that you've met the team, I'd like to move on to resources. So I don't know about you, but when you undertake, a significant endeavor like this, you probably want to get a better understanding of, hey, what are all the resources that are out there that I can benefit from? And I think it's an important thing to take into consideration, and some wise words that were shared with me, which is, it is an APA exam. And so we'd like to make sure that we go straight to the source. So your first tip is think APA and go straight to the source. I think it's a very important component, and don't overlook it, right? We know that there's different planning websites out there, and we know that each of them will offer different resources for different things. Well, we know that the AICP is administered by APA, and so we want to go straight to the source. And luckily, that source has a wealth of information and resources available for you. So on the APA website, this is actually a snapshot of what that looks like. And so it kind of walks you through different resources. Please note that the PowerPoint presentation also includes a link to where you can find each of these web pages or each of these resources that we're going to share with you tonight. So you'll have the link to refer back to. And I think a very important and key item is APA puts together a guide to the application as well as the exam process. They just recently did this within the last year, I believe, and it's a two-part guide. One of the parts of the guide is actually to share with you what the application process is like and what it entails. And so it's about a 23-page document. It's very informative and includes everything from A to Z. And you should note, just a snapshot for future, that there's a guide part 2 that helps you with the preparation of the exam. That is also kind of an A to Z guide, also available on that same webpage to getting certified. Now, it's important, as we all probably know as planners, that we kind of put together a plan of attack, right? And if we're thinking of a plan of action, we probably want to get some dates straight. Now, please note that the exam is administered 2 times a year, and so the window application is also available 2 times in the year. And so it's important to kind of make a mental note of some important dates that are provided on the APA website. So mark your calendars. This is an important thing to kind of make a mental note of. And if we're strategizing, please be mindful of the fact that, the application window is opening on June 3rd. Hence why we're putting together this application preparation session, so that you feel adequately prepared to be able to submit an application as soon as the application window opens, if you're at that point where you're ready to commit. And I think another important thing to note, which we'll go into details in a little bit later in the session, which is there's an early bird deadline. And you can see that it's a close window, right? So the application window opens June 3rd, and then the early bird deadline is June 10th, right? So it's a 7-day window to get in for the early bird consideration. The final application deadline is June 27th. And note that this is actually for the fall exam. So as we talk about how many times is the AICP exam administered throughout the course of the year, it's twice a year. And there are 2 application windows in the course of a calendar year. And so right now we're talking about the fall exam with a spring application window. And note there that the testing window is in November. So, there goes Thanksgiving. But now, also another important component to note is that there's fees. So as we make our plans and we identify important dates in the application process, there's fees that we also need to take into consideration. So let's talk money. In terms of the money, I think it's important to note that the application fee, and you can see it on the APA website, the application fees are non-refundable, as are, most of the fees, right? It's a commitment that you're making, so it's also a commitment in terms of, the application, the exam fee, the registration fee, the transfer fee, those are all non-refundable. And I think it's an important thing to note that there's an application fee, and then there's also a registration fee for the exam. So hypothetically, if you get the good news that, once you submit your application, then there's an opportunity for you to actually sit for the exam. The registration fee is the fee to sit for the AICP exam. And as we'll talk a little bit later, when you are finding that, hey, maybe you were given the good news that you're able to sit for the exam, but maybe it's not the right time for you, you can't make the commitment to studying, you don't have that, the energy or the time or the ability to do so, you can also choose to transfer, which I know some of the panelists can probably share with you that experience in terms of transferring your ability to sit for the exam, and you just pay a fee so that you can shift your exam date. So instead of doing it in the fall, maybe you don't have time and you want to do it in the spring. So that's an alternative option for you too. And I think an important thing to take into consideration as well is that, sometimes when we undertake something as significant as this, maybe you want to explore kind of your options, not only in terms of resources, but also, maybe you're looking at, the ability to have some financial support from your employer. What I have found is, I know that in my particular case, my boss was very supportive, not only of the resources utilized for the exam, but also for the exam fee itself. And I think an important thing to kind of note is that, if you're looking for some financial assistance from your employer, don't be shy about it. I think it's an important thing to note because it's a reflection also of, the company, whether it's a public agency or a private sector company. The employer usually is someone that wants to support your professional development. And so from that standpoint, I think when you're asking for employer assistance, one of the cool things that APA National provides is they actually have talking points for you to discuss if you'd like to have that conversation with your employer. So one of the handouts that we have for you here today, as well as available on the APA National website through the link that's provided on the screen, actually helps you to have that conversation, talking points for if you'd like to get some financial assistance with the exam fee or the study materials. And then we also have scholarship opportunities. If you're facing a financial hardship, the state does award 2 scholarships per section every testing window. And if accepted, applicants may have a reduced exam registration fee of $75. And so all you have to do is submit a written explanation of your financial hardship. And for that, we also have the link provided on the slide in case you needed some assistance. And I should note that not too many people take opportunities of the scholarships, unfortunately, and I don't really know why. I think, it's something that through your APA membership, you're able to kind of benefit from if you do need some financial assistance. And maybe, the application registration fee doesn't seem that high, maybe for some, because it's about $70. But when we talk about the exam fee, that's $425. And so it is more of a significant consideration. And I'd just like for you to think about, submitting for a scholarship, because when nobody applies, unfortunately, we're not able to award them, and there the money sits where you could potentially benefit from it. So take that into consideration. And then next, I'd like to have us go over the actual application steps, right? So I'm going to ask for our panel to also help us kind of go through the motions of this. We'll also be taking any questions that we have. And I'd like to hand it over to, I think I'm going to go with, okay, so we're going to start off with Rose.
All right, so how to apply. You have to be a member of APA to apply, so pay your dues and make sure your APA membership's up to date, which is easy, but also costs money. Review the eligibility requirements. It's that table at the sliding scale. If you went to PAB grad school, it's 2 years, or now you can be a candidate. So depending on your planning degree and your level of education, how many years of experience you need. I will say that review the education, because you can use part-time work. I think I was technically a week and a half short of 2 years when I applied, so I put all my grad school stuff on there too and had them be like, it's fine. And they will, if it's part-time internship work. There's a calculation to figure out what, they shorten it, like you'd be working full-time. So you can use part-time or internship work to kind of beef you up if you're right at that stage and you were like me, you're like, I need to do this now, and you're freaked out, you're gonna get rejected because you weren't working the first week of June in 2016. So look at those. Submit the application online and pay your fees. You can write the application before June 3rd. I was ready to go and opened at noon. You submit it. It's pretty easy. The questions are online. I think it's still 3 essays, right? Do early bird. There's no reason not to. And if your essays are rejected, you have time to go back. And I know people that struggled more with the essays just because it's hard, especially like I was in CEQA still, it can be hard to kind of finesse those essays, so do early bird. You will receive an email months later. It is a painful experience. Your friends will start texting you that they got accepted, and you'll be sitting at work freaking out if you're anything like me. So I think it was like, for me, I applied literally 5 minutes after it opened, and it took until like August 12th to get my email. It was rough, yeah. So it's a while. You'll totally, it's fine. If you do early bird, you'll get accepted. It's not an issue, but it's going to be a while. And you should study. Do not wait to study until you get your email. It takes them months to read 3 paragraphs. I don't know why, but start studying. And then register for your exam. Again, at work, stop eating your lunch, register immediately. There's few slots, and if you want to get like that sweet 10 a.m. Thursday after you've had your coffee, get your seat, and then you, like for me, you can take it early. I started freaking out and like went there at 8 a.m. and they let me sit down. So make sure you get your preferred date for when you're sitting.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Are your employment verification letters due with your application?
Yes.
Okay.
So start emailing, especially if you've like left a job, email them early and write it for them. You know what you did. So write everything for them. There's a draft online, copy paste. I'm great at planning. This is what I did. They just sign it. It's really, really easy, but just do all that stuff early, especially with old bosses who don't really care if you get your AICP, they're gonna take a while. So that's a great question. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, of course.
I actually sent mine in April because I knew it was going to take forever for them to respond, and I wanted to do the early bird. I applied the day that it opened. I actually heard back 14 days later because I knew I wasn't going to start studying if I didn't know if I'm going for the exam or not. And for some reason, I thought, oh my God, they're not going to accept my application. So that's really helpful. Yeah.
I'm gonna add to this one and make everyone upset. So I did with the candidate program, which people who don't understand what the candidate program, I'm sure there's some people who are streaming it right now. If you're in school, it's a different way of being able to do it, to where you can sit for the exam while you're finishing up. Say you're in school or recently graduated, you can then sit for the exam and get your work experience out of the way. Now I have the work and all that at the same time while I was studying. So once I pass the exam, I could just go in and I'll be done. 48 hours. It took me 2 days once I did the application. They came back saying you were approved. So now I don't know if that's standard, but I was even surprised. I was like, that was really, really quick. So just keep that in mind too. look into the candidate program, that's something that, I mean, I was just up at the APA conference in San Francisco, and there were a handful of people who were all in the candidate program. We're all talking about it. So,
Can you speak up? It's hard to hear.
is it not? Is this thing on? Sure.
As long as it's up.
I think this is this just going into there, right? Okay, so it's talk up so you can, okay, so you're in the audience.
Yeah, we can be super loud and obnoxious. We could be super loud and obnoxious. I think one of the things to take into consideration, as we kind of covered too, it's like everybody has a different experience. I will say that I have actually heard that the the candidate program actually gives you a response quicker. Now that's definitely a different steps in the process for the candidate program, but I have also heard horror stories in terms of being able to get a response, and you certainly don't want to wait to study before you actually, you don't want to wait for the response before you start studying. You want to keep studying, because I think it's a comprehensive exam, so I think it's really important to kind of take that into consideration. And we will actually go through the application content as well, so we can kind of share anecdotally too our experiences with those different subject areas. But we have a question?
Yeah, a follow-up question on the employment verification letters. I don't know if any of the panelists had this experience where, as I understand it, APA requests that the verification letters come on stationery or letterhead from your employer. However, my employer has taken the position that they cannot put letters of recommendation on stationery or letterhead. So if any of you have had that issue or any guidance from APA on how to address that?
Yeah, actually, APA actually has, so one of the handouts here today, also available on the website, and we'll actually include a link on the PowerPoint. There's a sample employment verification letter, and I have to say, I don't know about you all, but during my application process, it was really drilled down on me in terms of make sure that you follow everything down to the details of things, because otherwise you can get any portion of your application rejected, which is why you have to be super detailed and methodical with every component. And there is, like I said, one of the handouts is an employment verification sample letter, and then there's also a guide to it so that you don't not include the information that they're looking for. So 2 handouts available. One is the actual employment verification letter, and the second one is the items that they're looking for through APA National of what should be included in the employment verification letter. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
I would just say if you have something in writing from them saying that they are not willing to put it on the letterhead, just include that. It's better to include more than not enough, just to be safe, because you never know why they're going to reject it. And that's something that could definitely work against you. Because I guess people could try to forge experience, so they take it very seriously.
Yeah. Okay, we'll keep moving on. And so now we're actually going to go through the application content. Hopefully we've covered enough thus far in terms of, the quick tips and tricks in terms of resources, dates, fees, and steps. Now we're going to drill into the details, and I'm going to also ask my panelists to help me out with this. So first we'll have Maria.
All right, bring your APA memberships to date. Yes, important. Make sure that your dues are paid, because you cannot apply if you didn't pay your dues. You have to be a member of national APA. That's all I have to say for that. That's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things to note on that one too is that this is a reason for the rejection too. So sometimes we don't think about it, because I don't know about you, but for us, our employer pays and reviews them automatically, so I don't even think about it. But if there's like a glitch in the system and it happens to be when you're applying for the exam, that's it. They will not hesitate to reject your application package. And it's almost, I feel like it's sort of, for me,
Afterthought, yeah.
As like a public sector employee, we kind of hold, members of the public accountable to like, okay, if you're submitting, for example, a conditional use permit, here's your list of submittal requirements, and if you don't have one, we're not going to accept it. So that's kind of how APA National works. So be very cognizant of that. Like I said, don't let your membership lapse. Don't let your fees go unpaid. verify that level of detail because you don't want to have paid and have worked so hard to put together an application package to just have it rejected. And then I'll ask Mike.
Review the eligibility requirements. Definitely do that. Remember, we're all here, right? Be a current member of the American Planning Association. Be engaged in professional planning, either currently or in the past, as defined by AICP. And have completed, at the time of application submission, one of the combination of education and corresponding years of professional planning experience. So, I mean, these are all, I mean, pretty self-explanatory when I can see. I mean, you see the repeating theory, or the repeating theme here of be a current member of the American Planning Association. When I want to add on that, when I was up at the national conference, they kept saying that too at the national conference. I guess that happens a lot. And it's not necessarily they're not paying it, it's just maybe more commonly they let it lapse. Mm-hmm. They had it for a year, didn't pay their renewal dues, and then they can't. Right. So that's where the problem really comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things to kind of keep in mind, these may seem, so the reason why it's emphasized that you need to review the eligibility requirements, because it just may seem like very organic. Okay, of course I'm a current member of APA, of course I'm in the planning profession. Note that it says as defined by AICP, right? And then have completed, note that as well, have completed at the time of the application submission one of the combinations of education and corresponding years of planning experience. I think an important thing to note is that, you know, sometimes less is more, and I think the way that APA is trying to alert you to how prepared you need to be is that they're saying, like, make sure that you go through this checklist of items and make sure that it meets our standards, right? So we're going to go over that in the next slide. So in terms of reviewing the eligibility requirements, I think it's an important thing to note, especially in that last bullet that you saw in the previous slide, which is you have to have the right combination of education and years of planning experience, right? And I think sometimes, you know, I think I've actually encountered this a lot, which is some folks are really eager to apply to become AICP, and they're, you know, kind of thinking, well, in about a month, I'll have exactly the amount of years of experience that I need. Well, if your application is due today and you won't be meeting the requirements of your planning experience, you know, until a month from now, that's not going to cut it, right? You have to be able to meet the requirements at the time that you apply. Otherwise, this is going to be a reason to get your application kicked back. And I don't know if all of you kind of have anything to share with regards to your years of experience or your education. Did you come from a PAB background? Did we get some? Yes. So Rose, yes, you did. Yeah. And so I think when you have a PAB background, then it cuts your years of experience in order to be able to apply to become AICP. And so, you know, if we kind of take a look at the chart, if you have 2 years of experience and a graduate degree in planning from a PAB, well, that's perfect, right? 2 years of experience and you've graduated, you have a graduate degree from a PAB. That's perfect. But so you can see that the number of years of experience is different if you were, for example, a graduate, you know, from a planning program that is not PAB accredited. And so that would be 3 years of experience that you'd need. So be mindful of the requirements in terms of years of experience and education, because they'll certainly ding you for that. Okay. And then I'll turn it over to Maria.
Submit the application and pay the fees. Is that the slide we're on? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Application fee is $70. Early bird submission fee, $70. Then you wait to hear if you're accepted into the exam or not. If you're accepted, then you pay the actual registration fee, which is $425. My boss told me that he's only paid for me once, so I better pass on the first time. I knew I didn't want to pay $500 on my own, so I didn't have a choice. That was kind of a boost for me, yeah. Transfer fee, if for some reason you feel you're not ready, something happens, you need to wait for the next exam window, you have to pay $100. And stuff happens, a lot of us had to reschedule exams, so that's good that they offer it. You don't have to go through the whole process again. All your stuff is already saved. If you're accepted, you stay in. Application fee, again, $70, and early bird resubmission fee, $70. So that's all you have to spend.
So what I want to know is, I'm sorry, just to go back through the panelists, did you do early bird registration? Yes. Rose, yes.
I did too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I definitely think what we're finding is that when you do early bird registration, the benefit of that, which leads to our next step, is if you do early bird registration, the benefit of that, the reason why it's highly encouraged is because you get to submit your application and get immediate feedback. Once, if we take a look at the dates, right? So hypothetically, let's fast forward to June 3rd, when the early bird registration window opens, right? You have until June 10th to submit for the early bird registration. And you basically submitted your application, it's with the reviewers, it's being reviewed, and they will give you a determination during that application window if you are accepted to sit for the exam or not. And if hypothetically they say that you're not able to sit for the exam, you have, they give you a reason why. So it could be potentially with the criteria, it could be that your graduate degree wasn't notarized, it could be that your employment verification letter was insufficient or did not meet their standards. So you'll get that immediate feedback, and then you'll be able to revamp your application, resubmit it, and still be in line with that application window so that you don't miss that exam time frame, right? So I think it's an important thing to note because hypothetically, if you were not to submit for early bird the application, then if you're denied and it's after the early bird, you're not going to get notified why you were denied. It would just be a blank statement of you were denied and you didn't meet, the requirements. And so then you'd have to reapply, right? So I think it's an important thing to kind of make a mental note of. There's a huge benefit to doing early bird registration. And it definitely does come in handy to do so, not only monetarily, but also in terms of the application process and your ability to successfully submit.
So if you don't do early bird registration, you register during the window, your application gets denied, do you have the ability to reapply within that registration window or application window?
So if I understood correctly, if you apply, I'm sorry. It's okay. Sorry. So if you apply during the early bird registration and then
If you don't apply.
Oh, if you don't apply
Yeah.
and you get denied, then you get denied and then you can reapply, but at that point in time, so the reviewers aren't able to give you a response in order for you to resubmit and reapply for that testing window. So hypothetically, let's just say that you're not submitting for the early bird in June, right? But you submit your application just like everybody else does, right? After the early bird registration deadline is done. Then you will be notified, hypothetically, let's just say that you were denied. Okay, well then you'll have to prepare for the application window in next spring. So you wouldn't be able to sit for the fall exam, and you're not able to reapply during that application window. So it kind of sets you back is an important thing to take into consideration. Any other question?
Not that I want to go down this road, but should I apply June 11th, just after the early bird registration, and I do get the denial, there's no reason given for why it was denied?
There's usually a general statement of your application was denied, you didn't meet the criteria, or your employment verification was insufficient, and so then you miss that window. I think it's more detailed usually when you do early bird, because then you're able to kind of revamp something as quick as or as easy as getting something notarized or getting something signed or on letterhead. So, okay, we're going to keep going. So here we have the application criteria. Now, it's important to be able to demonstrate your professional experience. As we've been kind of talking, this is APA standards for AICP. So one of the important things to note is that, kind of think about where you're at in your career. And this is, I think, an important component, and this is what Rose was sharing, which is, the application criteria, the 3 essays that you're asked to put together that kind of speaks to, hey, I'm ready to become AICP. That's the really critical part, right? So I think most of us, for the most part, can follow directions rather well, right? So when it comes to putting together an employment verification letter, when it comes to getting your degrees notarized and submitted, I think that's pretty straightforward. But where it gets a little more dicey is the application criterion. And that's where APA is asking you, tell them why you're ready to become AICP. And it's specifically addressing these questions within the application, right? So the first one is, involve a professional level of responsibility and resourcefulness while applying a planning process appropriate to the situation. So that can mean a number of different things depending on whether you're a private sector planner, public sector planner, or if you're in transportation planning versus environmental planning. But I think it's an important thing to take into consideration that these are essay questions, so they're certainly expecting you to provide a certain level of information and detail that speaks to your readiness. Second item is to demonstrate a comprehensive point of view when implementing professional planning tasks. And then thirdly, to influence public decision-making in the public interest. I think an important thing to take into consideration when you're trying to demonstrate your professional experience is, and I think an important thing to note, is that you have to basically prove and share with the reviewers why you're ready to become AICP, but it also has to correlate with your employment verification letters. So one of the things to be able to note is that if you're submitting 3 employment verification letters, then those are the times of employment that you should also be referencing during your application criteria and essays, right? So if you worked at, the city of La Mesa, and you had noted that you had, experience in the public decision-making process and the public interest, but that was at the city of Santee, then you want to make sure that you also have an employment verification letter for the city of Santee, because that's the experience that you're referencing in your essay. So be very diligent and mindful of that, where if you're saying that I am ready to be AICP and I meet this criteria because of X, Y, and Z experience, then you need to be able to have an employment verification letter that speaks to, hey, I was at this agency or this company during this time, and this is where I got this experience. And I think another kind of important thing to note is the guide part 1 to the application process that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that actually has some do's and some don'ts, so language that they're looking for. There's a checklist available on the APA website, which is what this link is for. So it helps you to, after you've put together your essays, to be able to go back through the checklist and make sure that you can check off each of the items that they're asking you to provide information about in your essays. So it's a very helpful guide, and you can probably provide that. Also, as Rose kind of mentioned, having a peer review of your application essays is always a good thing, because I'm sure you'll be sitting with your application criterion essays for a while, trying to determine, I think this is good enough, it makes sense to me, but is it the 3rd day that you've been reading it and it's, kind of feeling very repetitive or redundant, or you think you've covered your bases? And then I think it's good to have another person take a look at it before you actually submit it, because they can take a look at any grammatical errors and also make sure that you've met the checklist items per APA. I think it's really important. Did anybody have any experiences with actually, sharing the application responses or the essays to the application criteria that did you share with one of your peers? Did you share it with your boss? Anything like that in terms of the applications? Wow, so you all are, that was awesome. I definitely shared it with people because I didn't feel as comfortable with, just, again, I had looked at the questions and I wanted to make sure that I was able to address them as best as I could. And I certainly didn't want to get a denial. And I also didn't want to have to pay the fee again. And I'd go through, kind of like the wait and see. So I definitely asked folks to review my responses to the criteria. And I will also note that the boards from each of the sections, so whether it be Central or whether it be the San Diego section, they are always willing, for those that are AICP board members, they're always willing to take a look at your application essays and review them, right? So if you wanted to have that additional layer of review, we're more than happy to do that. We've already done that for some folks that are going to be submitting for this application window. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. But if you wanted to keep it to yourself and you were maybe like Rose and Maria and you didn't want to have somebody else take a look at your work, just using the APA checklist I think is a good kind of guide because they do have questions that kind of help you think about your responses before you submit them to make sure that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's. Okay, so the fourth step, you receive the email notification. I think Rose was sharing, or was it Maria that was sharing, that they'll send you an email notification and you're able to sit for the exam, which is great, but I think a big important thing to ask yourself, and I'm going to turn to Mike because I feel like this is more relevant to your experience, where if it's not the right time in your life and you're not ready to take the exam, you certainly don't want to, spend $425 and then have to pay that again later, right? So make sure that you assess where you're at and whether you're able to make the commitment to prepare for the exam adequately, because again, you want to check if it's the right time in your life to dedicate as much time and energy as you need to in order to prepare for the exam. Yes, Katya?
Thank you. I know that you prefaced this evening by saying not every approach fits for every person, but approximately how much time are we talking in terms of a study commitment?
Yeah, I think, suffice it to say, we have a whole nother section or a whole nother training session on the exam preparation. But I think it's different for everybody because it is, I think an important thing to underscore is that it is a comprehensive exam, and I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on that. It's a comprehensive exam, and what I usually tell folks that are preparing is that just as different as we are individuals with our own personalities, we're also different learners. So in addition to what's going on with life, which is like work, family, personal life, etc., in addition to that, we all learn differently. And so, for me, it may take me, months on end to be able to feel comfortable with comprehensively tackling all the different components of the exam. But for somebody else who's a quick learner, maybe it's a shorter time frame. I think the study time and the preparation time will be different based on the kind of learner that you are. I know it took me forever, so I wanted to make sure that I was sure and that I gave myself enough time because I knew what my study habits were in college, so I kind of mimicked that. But maybe the panel can ask some additional thoughts.
I'll jump in on this one offhand. Excuse me. I mean, it's a unique. I think the difference between taking this test and other tests is, take them in school, you know exactly what you're doing. It's phrased out. With the AICP, you're given a whole bunch of information and say, know it all in addition to what you've known before. And here it's different tests and different questions and different times. So it's where your comfort zone is. But there's definitely different methods between the different, like I have both the APA and I have several different study methods, and I know from what a lot of people have told me, to understand the test, you should do the APA one, and then everything else is kind of supplemental to that. But it's just a lot of information, and it's sometimes you have to feel comfortable when you're doing the practice test. I think around 70-80% on the practice test is where you want to be, and you want to be above that, but that's like your threshold. And even then, when I sat for it, like I said, I'm open for it because I think people can learn from that experience. When I sat for it, there were questions in the exam that I hadn't seen anywhere in my prep material. And in that's why I started opening up to other exam stuff as I've been studying now, because I only studied with the APA material. And I know there's other ones that are out there. What is it? Examprep.com, I think that's the one. And that's put in by a lot of users. And people who, right now, there's people who are uploading those questions in based on other questions they've seen in the exam. So just, you're right, everyone's a little different. And I mean, you know yourself where your comfort level is and where you feel confident when you're going into it. But this is unique because we're doing a professional exam when we have lives, families, work, you know, I mean, I run a company. It's like there's different things that we have to do. So you're not, no one's going to scold you or yell at you. You're making a professional, mature decision. Hey, I can do it, or you know what, maybe I should take another few months and study this. So there's nothing wrong. Some people I heard took a chance and they passed it. You know, I mean, that's up to you if you want to gamble it. I think it's what, like a 30 or 40% pass rate or something. I take a little more time if you need to. So.
There's a massive amount of information. Even if you've been a planner for 8 years and you know what planning is, you're not going to pass the test without studying. There's a ton of history, dates, books, authors, literature. There's numbers, formulas that you just don't use in your everyday life. So I wanted to make sure I find out if I'm going to sit for the test as early as possible. So I found out on June 14th, and then I signed up for the last possible date at the end of November, just to get as much time as possible to study. I started kind of studying lightly because I had a trip in the middle of July, so I just started doing flashcards, reading the materials without really cramming. And then after that, I was hitting it really hard in September. Between September and November, that was every night, every weekend, I was studying full time, up until the very last day. So I wouldn't delay it. I would start in the summer, and that's as long as it's going to take you to cram it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best thing to do is find all the practice tests you can and then build a study plan back off that so you can kind of see, okay, July, do I suck? The answer is probably yes. Because it's not about being a good planner, it's about passing this test, and that's difficult in its own right. So I would say based off a test, because how you're doing on practice tests is really going to be the best metric. I think every weekend I take about 4 hours. On my commute, I did flashcards, lunch, I did podcasts. And if you do have a lot of time, I would say, because I was ready like a year before, I was like, let's do this. Start watching movies. Just YouTube, because then you kind of get in the planning mindset. You just really want to watch Jane Jacobs documentaries for a couple months and just really in PBS. And then when you're starting the flashcards, you're actually connecting to something, not like a blank void in your head. So I would say kind of, if you're, because I was also ready 2 months early and I then got crazy. So ease yourself into it by really getting yourself kind of in the mood for it. And then, flashcards every night, taking tests regularly, and just the best study tip I have, and they didn't ask for it, is just take practice tests all the time. It's just passing the test. That's all this is. It's passing the test. So the more practice questions you can do, it's better than a flashcard.
Practice tests, I also want to point out, there's the Mike Weisich test. Everyone used them. And then by the last test, you feel like you're really good, you're going to kill it. Yes, I'm getting all these questions right. And then if you try another source online, they have completely different approach, different questions, and then you panic, oh my God, I thought I know this, and I don't. So try to find several different sources so that you're not feeling overly confident, because the practice tests, they don't even look like the new exam. And we probably should find out some new materials because, there's a different approach now to questions. And there's not a really good practice test from APA. They give you like 2 or 3 questions. Yeah. So.
There are 2 things. One, it's planningprep.com, not exam prep, sorry. And even then, I'm going to Google it when I get a chance just to make sure, because I just have it saved in my phone and my computer. But that's really important. I think that's huge. Don't let this make you think you're not a good planner. Don't. Because, we're planners, we're professionals. Don't let it. You've gone through all of these things. It's just, you're going to see stuff you don't know. There is so much information to study on this. I know where I went to school and did my master's, we had different concentrations, and it's just, there's such a breadth of information in there that you're going to have to know all of it. So you're going to hit the sections maybe you didn't focus on. And you go, oh my God, I remember when I was studying, I was like, I suck. And I'm like, no, I don't, It's just, these are things I didn't focus on. These are things I didn't work with. So don't let it get in your head and define you. It's just stuff you have to brush up on and learn. That's all.
Absolutely. I think that, it definitely for me, it was a journey. And I know that I felt like I wasn't a good planner if I wasn't able to pass for the exam. But I think it definitely, as we broke it down, it's an exam. It's administered by APA. Study the materials and, go at it. But I think the earlier that you can study, the earlier that you can make a plan, put together your resources, try to not let yourself feel overwhelmed with the amount of information out there. Go straight to the source. I mean, hopefully today's session kind of gives you some tips and tricks to kind of help you put together what is best for you in terms of the resources that you use, the study time that you give yourself, and make a good plan of action. And then you also need to register and schedule the exam. So hypothetically, if you're one of the lucky ones that is informed that you're able to sit for the exam, then you need to register and schedule the exam with Prometric. And so one of the tips is to commit, to actually register early for the exam, to pick what's best for you. And I think Rose was sharing with all of you that you really want to be able to identify a good day and a good time that works best for you. So if you know that you're like a morning person or potentially not, you want to kind of pick your exam time and date, accordingly. I think another thing to take into consideration is that, the earlier that you register, the more availability that you have with the testing center, right? Because everybody is going to try to register for different types of exams at the standardized testing center. And so the time that you're looking for, the date that is convenient for you, may not be available the more that you prolong it. So you want to be able to identify, okay, morning person or afternoon person, and based on my schedule in the month of November, what am I aiming for? And sometimes you can also do that to give yourself more study time, because if you register early, you can say, okay, I'm going to take the exam the last possible date of the exam window, right? You can be one of those people. But if you wait until the last minute, you'll have to take probably the first available, date. And so you don't want to set yourself up for failure. You want to set yourself up for success. And so now that we've covered the application content, I'd like to have us go through some APA tips. And these are tips directly off of the National APA website. But I think before we do that, I'd like to have you hear someone's story, someone who just recently kind of went through all the hoops, hurdles, and hard tacks of preparing, of applying, of preparing to take the exam, of taking the exam. So I'd like to have Caitlin join us and have her share her story of how she made it, and she is now AICP.
Sorry, it's kind of awkward up here. Hi, so I did just pass it on Monday, so this is all very recent. Thank you. So we've already heard a lot of good information, I think, on how people have studied for the test, but I'll kind of take you from my application to how I studied to actually taking the test. So I come from an environmental planning background, so for me, the application was very nerve-wracking, and I had to spend a lot of time on the criterion because they are such simple, broad statements. So the essays themselves, they're only 250 to 500 words, and I think I probably spent weeks on it. Like, I'm embarrassed about the amount of time it took me to write the essays for this application. But what I really had to do was take a look at my resume and then try and pick out individual projects that might speak to each of the criterion, the broad statement of, was this a comprehensive planning effort? Did this involve the public interest? And then kind of break it down from there. And I would always shoot for the 250 words and then review it again and see if there was anything I could use to emphasize it or make it a little bit more specific. The guide that Lorena showed early on was really, really helpful to me. The do's and don'ts are really helpful because, again, like criterion 3 is the one that really drove me crazy, especially as a consultant who works for a client where we do care about the public interest, but we also are focused on our clients. The criterion 3 is just influence public decision-making in the public interest. And so I really had to look at that and think, okay, so even though I was representing my client's interests, how were we trying to hear what the public had to say on this specific project, and how did we massage out their interests? So that one probably took me the longest out of all the criterion. And I will say, I know 2 people who were in private consulting who did get their applications rejected off of that specific question. So they really do want you to say how you're caring about the public interest. If you read the Code of Ethics, it's the first principle with AICP planners aspire to, is to represent the public interest. So focus on that one. Let's see. So I did apply early bird. I recommend it. I will say pay close attention to the application dates and times, because we're in Pacific time. The early bird window closes at midnight Central time, so thankfully I was on a work trip when I submitted it, and I submitted it at 11:50 Central time, but if I had been home trying to do my last minute thing, I would not have made the early bird deadline. So I didn't get rejected, so it ended up working out, but just make sure you're really reading it and paying attention. There is, as Lorena and everybody has mentioned, there's a ton of information on the website, and so just give yourself time to process it all as you're going through these steps. I actually also, we all have different experiences, but so I applied, I got accepted, I was very excited, so I immediately picked a test date, and then I proceeded to not study and let work, take back over, because I felt like the application was a big hurdle for me. And so I got probably 2 months out from my exam date, which was first supposed to be for November, and I started studying, and I was like, man, there is just too much. Like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to pass it. And similar to Maria, I don't think they said they wouldn't pay for it twice, but I think I only get reimbursed if I passed it by my employer. So I was like, I would rather pay $100 out of my own pocket to delay it 6 months, take the study time, and then actually have a better chance at passing the test. And it paid off because I did pass. So, I definitely, as they mentioned, make sure you are committing to a date and then setting yourself a realistic study schedule back from the date that you pick. And if you are nervous, I personally think it's worth it to just delay and give yourself the extra time, because if you're close enough where you're feeling a little iffy, you're not getting good grades on practice tests, it's probably worth it. So, what else? So as far as studying for the test, there's an outline that kind of shows that I think it's 5 different sections that you'll be tested on. And I would review that and then treat each one of those like it's a cumulative test on just that outline. Like you've attended a class on just history and theory for a year, and now cumulatively, you could be tested on anything from that entire course. And you have to really treat each outline section like its own cumulative exam. So what I would recommend is kind of put on your planning nerd hat and really get into learning the history and the theory and the law early on, because that really is the foundation. And those are the questions that you should just be able to nail really easily. Like if you see something about the White City, it's Daniel Burnham, it's Chicago. You have to kind of be able to connect these planning theories and people and landmarks and just have that at the ready. So I would study that early and study that until you feel really comfortable with it. And then as you get closer to the test, as Rose pointed out, you have to really start thinking, how does APA want me to approach these things? So, for example, APA has, I think, 23 policy guides, and I would really recommend in the last month really studying those, because I know on my test, again, it's a big pool of questions, so you never know what part of the outline you're going to get a question from, and for whatever reason, I got 3 questions on homelessness. I had looked at the APA guide on homelessness, the APA policy guide on homelessness, and I was like, yep, I understand those theories, but there were actually specific questions about what the APA thought drove homelessness in a certain decade, and I was like, I bet if I had read that guide really carefully, this would be one of those easy questions that I could just knock off. So really, I would say in the last few months, when you're getting ready to take your exam, just think, what does the APA want me to know? What would APA want me to do in this situation? As far as taking the exam, it's 150 questions, and then there's 20 pre-test questions, so you're actually filling out 170 questions as you go through the exam. The pre-test questions are not identified, and they're just kind of thrown in the mix, and I think those are the questions that when you get them, you think, I didn't study this at all. So it really can kind of mess up your mojo. I'm always like one level below panic, but when I was taking the test, it was like a real roller coaster where I would be like, yeah, I'm getting them all right, and then there would be this question out of left field, and since it was like question 120, I couldn't put together that I had already done pretty well before that. It just immediately sunk my whole confidence. So there's some, as you get closer to taking the test, you know, you have to rely on yourself and know how you take tests. You can mark questions and go back. So I guess I could give some test these people, are any of you guys actually signed up to take the test yet? No? Okay, it might be a little premature, but you know, definitely employ your test taking skills. It is a really long test. It's a 3-hour window, and it's at a testing center, so you just sit in front of a computer. They do let you take breaks, so I went through the entire test. I answered all 170, and then I took a 5-minute break. And then I came back in, and I reviewed the ones that I had marked, and I think when I first went through, I had marked about 80 of the 170 that I wasn't sure about, so that was another confidence dip for a second. But as I went back through it, I was able to knock off like 40 more of those, you know, and so then when it got down to it, there were probably only 15 that I was kind of like a toss-up between 2 answers. You will hear this a lot as you start studying. There are multiple types of questions, but the most tricky ones are the ones where they say a question and then they give you 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the multiple choice answers are, is it 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 2 and 4, or all of the above. And so those are the ones that you have to really have a strategy for breaking it down, making sure you're reviewing it, really make sure you understand what you're answering before you pick an answer. And then those are the ones that I marked, even if I thought I was right, to go back and just make sure I had chosen the right combination. Another tip is to mark all the law questions, because it is a pool, I think of what, like 900 or 1,000 questions. Any of them could come up, so you might get 2 questions that are pretty similar. So if you mark all your law questions and you're unsure, you can go back and check them, and then you might get an answer for an earlier question. So, and then I think that's pretty much all the tips that I have. I mean, like Lorena said, it was quite a journey. It took me over a year to study for it. I think I probably really studied at the end, you know, crammed more than I should have, so I would not recommend doing that. Like I said, I would get the dates and law down, because that stuff, like when you see them on the test, you don't have to think about it, and then you can really think about the tricky stuff, you know, spend the time on that. Oh, thanks.
Sit down with us. Oh, got it. Sorry, I was about to trip there. I think it's important. I always, every time that we do an AICP event, I think it's extremely important to actually hear a testimonial as I like to call it, because it's like somebody that can attest to the fact that they've made it to the other side and become AICP. And it's always very inspiring, especially because I know that when I was preparing, I was like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? And am I going to be able to, you know, become a certified planner? It seems like an insurmountable task. And I think that when you actually hear someone else's story and they kind of share with you that it's a journey, that there's hoops and hurdles in the process, I think it makes you feel like, okay, this feels the same way for everybody. So it's going to be a journey and a process, and I just need to commit to it and, you know, carry on. And so with that, I'd like to just have us go into the APA tips. So these are tips that are coming straight through the APA national website, right? And so there's a series of tips, and I think it's an important thing to kind of note that these are coming straight from APA, and we'll kind of share anecdotally. I'm going to ask the panel to kind of share, and then we'll go through each of them. So here we go.
Before applying for certification, read the AICP Guide Part 1 Certification Application. But I think actually came out after I applied, so I did not do this. But just read through the essays. Honestly, if you have friends that passed AICP, you have 4 new ones, grab their essays. Especially someone in the same, like I was doing full CEQA. Like, that, which sucks, because then you're like, oh yeah, I haven't a public hearing in 3 years. This is really hard. So just read through everything, talk to your friends that are AICP or your boss, someone, and just really kind of understand that. Because I do think that honestly, writing those essays caused me more heartburn than taking the test did. They really did. And looking at that now, I have my AICP. I would never want to write those essays ever again in my entire life. So make sure it's really understanding the application. I think that while we were all talking beforehand, and AICP is a fixed amount of pain, and you kind of decide how to spread out that pain.
Everyone excited to take it? Are we there? So I'll point that out.
All right, it pays to apply early. If you apply during the early bird window and your application is denied, you can address the issues and reapply in the same exam window. We talked about that extensively.
Obviously, super important. I just
Yeah.
want to stress the importance of this. You need to all get the benefit of this. Honestly, early, I know people kept telling it to me, and I know I kept sharing like the words of wisdom, and I have seen, the benefits of that. Actually, we've had a couple of people in my office kind of go through the same hoops and hurdles of becoming the AICP, and I cannot emphasize the importance of the early bird, honestly.
One thing I will say is when you do get your application rejected, they will note if you're early bird, if you get your, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it like it's a foregone conclusion. It does seem to be very common, so don't feel bad if you do get your application rejected. Again, a lot of smart people just don't write 200 to 500 words well enough to address a very broad sentence. But they only give you a week to redo your application. So that was the one thing, because I didn't actually have to redo mine, but my coworker did. And so I think it took a couple months. She got a rejection, and she had to revise her essays and resubmit it within a week. And she got rejected on the essays, but it could also be for an employment verification. So you just have to be ready to address it very quickly. It's not like you've got a long window. And then you do pay the $70 again to apply.
All right, so tip number 3, Mike.
Tip number 3, to ensure your verification letters will be accepted, provide your references with a copy of the sample job verification letter. So now this one actually I have not done because I'm in the candidate program. So the candidate program does their employment verification last. So that's one I haven't done. But for anyone else, if they want to chime in on this one, because I don't have this one.
Yeah, ignore this tip, write your own letters. You go, grab the, APA has a whole thing. It has the 2, number 8, whatever. You write your own. Send it, especially if it's an old boss. Send it yourself. So you grab, what's it called? The sample. Write your own, be like, hi, please put on your letterhead and sign it. And send that tomorrow. Go home tonight, do that right now. But yeah, I wouldn't even ignore APA on this. Listen to everything else, but yeah, write your own if you can.
One more thing to note is that it doesn't have to be your direct supervisor. It can be like the HR department. So if your boss has left or something, and then, oh yeah, one more thing that is important. So I graduated from a non-planning accredited board with a bachelor's, and so I had to wait 4 years to apply. Some of my experience was part-time, so I think it took a total of 6 years for me before I was able to apply. So you have to pay attention to that full-time equivalency calculator when you're putting in your part-time hours. And when you're actually entering it into the application, it will calculate it for you. So as it was calculating it, I was like, oh my God, did I calculate this wrong? Is it not gonna take it? But it was like right over. So maybe have somebody check your math too.
And then the employment verification letters too.
Go ahead.
I wasn't going to say it.
Oh, I think she was just handing. Oh, that's what we're doing.
Sorry. So what I was going to say was, okay, so the link on the slide is actually the sample of the job verification. For those of you in the room, that is one of the handouts. And I think, again, the sample verification, I know one of my experiences was, obviously for your current employer, it's easier because, you're there and you just need to, as Rose said, put together your own letter and then just submit it for them to sign. But when it comes to like a past employer, note that you also need to be as diligent. And I have found that when you do your own letter, it makes it so much easier for like your old boss or your old employer to just be able to sign it. And also, it's very encouraging when you say, I need this because I'm trying to become AICP. They seem to my boss turned it around so quickly, and he generally he liked to take his time. Obviously, they have more important matters. But once I said I need it for AICP, I need to submit it by this date, he turned it around immediately. So I do think there's a lot of truth to writing your own employment verification letters, use a sample from the APA national, and then make sure that you disclose that it's for your, for your application to become AICP. So, okay, Caitlin, application to APA.
So acceptable ways to verify your educational experience include providing a notarized diploma, providing official transcripts from your university, or providing a letter from the university confirming your degree and graduation date on letterhead. I got my diploma notarized because I went to a bunch of different schools in the course of getting my bachelor's, and that was the easiest way. It costs like $15. So I would recommend that one because it's just a lot less heartache. So.
And then if you have changed your name since you've gotten your degrees, you also need, I don't know what it is, I haven't changed my name yet, but you do need to be aware that you have to prove that you're the person who got your degrees, and I believe that's something at the test center too. So if you change your name, you're running from the law, you got married, whatever it is, make sure you also submit that with your degree.
Thank you. And I would say one of the things, so anecdotally, I'll share with you that I actually had helped somebody after the fact because they were panicking because they were like, I think they were trying to submit their application in a rush and they forgot to get their degree notarized. And it specifically asks you to get your degree notarized if that's going to be the category. So if you submit something and it's not notarized, I mean, again, I hate beating a dead horse, but I think it's really important that APA says you need to get it notarized. Get it notarized. Don't submit it and think that they'll forget because they won't. And then you'll be at a loss on that. Okay, so then we're moving on to application tip 5. A complete job history is not required. Focus on providing specific experience that meets the minimum eligibility requirements. So I think, again, important to note that everything has to kind of correlate, right? So when we say, okay, I have X number of years of experience, and as I'm responding to the essays, this is where my experience is, then make sure that you also have the employment verification letters, right, that speak to that experience. So I think you need to make sure that everything kind of connects the dot, but you don't have to list every job under the sun. It's not like they're asking you to provide, your background from, the last 20 years or the last 5 years. It's only the job experience that you think is relevant to being able to prove that you're AICP ready, right? So make sure that there's that connection with all the information and all the documents that you provide. Okay, Rose?
Can I have the notes? Thank you. Where are we? 6, thank you. And I did use this one. So internship experience can count as long as it wasn't part of your degree. So I think every degree requires you have to get an internship. So as long as you're not enrolled in whatever Planning 105 internship and you're not using that for credit, you can use other internships. I personally used, but maybe don't take this that seriously, like when I was a grad assistant in grad school, I did work for money, not for a grade, so that was totally chill. And I did use that because I didn't need it for I kind of need it for 2 years, but more importantly, if it's on your essay and you're like, oh, I worked for a city for 3 months and I went to a public meeting, I really need that. Make sure that you're connecting those dots. But yeah, so if you're like me and you were a week shy of 2 years, grab them all.
Part-time professional planning experience can count towards professional planning experience. Simply prorate that experience into a full-time equivalent. Similarly, persons working full-time but devoting a portion of their time to another field may also prorate their experience into a full-time equivalent.
I'm sorry, Caitlin, did you say that you had experience with this with your part-time experience?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So when I graduated, I worked part-time for a planning company for 2 years and then full-time for 4, full-time for 3, I think. So between the 3 years full-time and then the 2 years part-time, I met the 4-year criteria. So I think because I was working at least 20 hours a week, it was just half, so the calculation was pretty easy. But if you're working like 30, I think the full-time equivalency calculation that they mentioned is a little bit different. I'm not sure if APA has a calculator, but I know that when you're putting it into the application, it'll calculate it for you. So I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
On that. Because I think California state law recognizes 32 hours as full-time. So is it just assumed to be full-time? I work 32 hours and it's deemed full-time.
I think as long as it's considered full-time by your employer, then it's full-time experience, so yeah.
Although that brings up a good point that you'll hear a lot. It is not a California test, it is a national test. So there are so many things you're gonna be like, if we're in California, this will be different. But yes, yeah, so not to that question, but in general, remind yourself, I'm a planner in somewhere random in New York. I am not a California person. Being in California will hurt you on this test if you're an exact, precise anal person.
So many ways we can pick that apart. They're in Chicago. No?
They are in
Chicago. Chicago.
But you can
Chicago.
actually send, you can actually send questions directly to APA. So if you have those kind of questions, I mean, you can always chance it. These applications are not reviewed, at the local level or at the state level. They're reviewed by folks at the national level. And so if you did have questions with regards to anything really in terms of APA, AICP, you can send them an email. And they're very responsive. So if you did kind of want to pose that question. If you don't get a response, well, maybe it's information, that's confidential or they can't disclose, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And I've used the APA email for a number of different things, and I've always received a response, so.
Tip number 8, we're going to talk about writing skills. When responding to the AICP professional planning criteria, provide unique responses for each criterion. Use the word I and speak directly to your role and responsibilities related to the project work described. Do not write about yourself in the third person. That's a given. Don't write about yourself in the third. Just don't. Don't ever in general. Yeah, don't. Unless you're tweeting. We're not even going there. Just don't. Yeah. Discuss your role, duties, and impact on the project outcome for the projects described. And responses must be related to the positions verified. You're a professional planner. Write professionally. Write correctly, right?
Yeah.
I'm a grammar Nazi. I'm going to say, yeah, here you go.
Well, 2 other tips on this. When responding to the criterion, they really recommend that you pick one example, because again, it's a very condensed essay. It's 250 to 500 words. So they don't want to hear a broad thing. They want one project example or one specific experience. And then they also do point out in the criteria guide where it says, planning is generally a team effort, but we really want you to focus on your role. And so you have to think about, what did I really do in this project? Because again, as a younger planner, as part of a team, it took me a while to tease out what I could really say I did. And I did use I assisted the senior planner in my criterion responses, and it did seem to work. But really just be specific about what you did and how it relates to the question. Oh, sorry, am I reading that? Sorry, tip 9. Sorry, my voice keeps cracking. I feel like a teenage boy. I think I'm getting over a cold. Tip 9, proofread your responses. Have a coworker review your material to have a second set of eyes for spelling and grammatical errors. So that one's basic.
Okay, so APA tip number 10. So project managers or people with substantial experience in the field sometimes take for granted the application process. So I've also experienced this where folks have been in the profession a really, really long time, and for whatever reason, they've kind of postponed going through the AICP process. And then they're not as diligent and not as detailed in their responses or in the application package. So, and I think another important thing to note here, as it says, APA is concerned not only with the number of years of planning experience, so if you have 30 years of, experience in the planning field, that's great, but we really need to be able to have you demonstrate that you meet the criterion, right? That you're able to speak, as we've all kind of shared, in terms of the I in the essays of your own experience, and specifically in the criteria that they're asking you. So even if you've had 30 years of experience in the planning profession, if you're not able to come up with good, sound responses to the criterion questions, then, it doesn't matter, right? So you need to be able to speak to that specific criteria that they're looking for to be able to attest that you're AICP ready. Okay, and Rose?
When finalizing your essays, make sure that a person who has not done the exact same time of planning work, or like your cat, well, not your cat, they can't read, your partner or your friend that knows English, can understand it. So making sure you're not using too many acronyms. I know that I basically I'm that person all the time. So just that it reads across, especially again, if you're a Californian and you're just like, CEQA, they're gonna be like, what is CEQA? And so making sure that we're so entrenched in our own lives that someone else from another place or this isn't in your field can understand it, but not your cat.
Okay, so we've actually gone over all the APA tips from APA National. We've also shared our own stories, and Caitlin has shared her recently becoming AICP story. And so we'd like to make sure that you're also feeling, to a certain extent, more knowledgeable and more comfortable with the application package and that hurdle. And so if you have any questions, feel free to ask away. I think we've tried to make sure that we kind of reach out to those that are in the room. If we have any questions, I'm going to look over to Greg to see if we have any questions from our live stream viewers. Perfect. Awesome. So, looks like we have a question.
So, this is a general question. Y'all mentioned, I wrote down some of the resources as well as started study guides or places to go. Is there a list? Is there a specific spot that you would say this is the one? I know you all mentioned that, it could vary, but is there one that you would recommend? I think, personally, I would like to start looking at that first, kind of get a gauge of where I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of the question is, we talked about the fall exam, but then,
Right. Okay, so I'm going to take a first stab at it, and then the panelists can kind of think about your responses. But we do actually have, this is primarily focused on the application content, right? And so this is one of the offerings. But we will also be offering a spring training, which is more focused on the exam itself and the study materials and resources for the exam. And there is actually a comprehensive list that the San Diego section uses, and there's also a CD that we provide folks that attend the spring training. And that's a compilation of all the different resources, PowerPoint presentations that we've had throughout the years, as well as some national study guides and resources. So we do have that available. And in terms of the spring, so usually the way that it works is that the application window will be in December, and then the testing window for spring will be in May. So right now is currently the spring exam window, and it's actually for some folks, it's a do or die kind of moment to becoming AICP. But yeah, that's usually how it works, is that in December you submit the application, and then the testing window is in May. Okay, and then I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to address the resources and all of that.
Start and then we work it, yeah. So I actually did have my company pay for the AICP 3.0 comprehensive exam, and I actually was going to ask if anybody knew. On the website it says you can only purchase it through May 31st. Do you know if it's being updated or changed? Okay, well, if that resource is available, it's still helpful. It does go through each of the sections of the exam, and it gives you some PowerPoints, which are very dry and very hard to watch, but do give you the information that you need to then drill down into, so I think that's a good place to start. There are just so many different sources available, it's kind of hard to pick one. And I think, as Rose mentioned, I think YouTube actually was really helpful. I Googled AICP exam prep and then each section of the outline, and I believe it was like the North Carolina and Pennsylvania and a couple other chapters had presented some webinars years back, and they're like a 1 or 2 hour summary of like the content for each outline, and that was really helpful for me. So I've got a long commute, so I just listened to those over and over again as I was driving, and I think that really helped to drill in some of the stuff that I was having a harder time to get. And then Plan Edison is another good one. I think both of those are about $150, $200. What's that? Oh, okay. Yeah, so Plan Edison might be expensive, but what Lorena suggested to me was getting a comprehensive guide and then finding what else you could do to supplement it. So you want something that touches every part of that outline. So I would recommend either AICP 3.0 or Plan Edison, and then just kind of supplement with the stuff that's available for free on the APA website, stuff on YouTube, podcasts, things like that.
I use Panelists and I liked it mostly because of practice tests, and I'm super auditory, so they had like little videos, and I could just, while I'm cooking dinner, listen, and that was great for me. I had a set of podcasts every day at lunch, so really, and then the Pennsylvania notes, they're daunting, but they're good. Just read those through. But yeah, I think it's more about, yes, finding a good comprehensive, but also knowing how you learn is more important, and finding a good amount of resources that actually work for you. And then the best thing I did is watch this PBS video about the 10 greatest towns in America, and it's the one resource I always say to it, because it's just like, for some reason, that's like the one thing that's still stuck in my brain. So yeah, videos were great for me, podcasts were great, so really, however you learn, and then anything you can expense.
Pennsylvania notes are available. Lorena could provide them, or you guys could email me. I referenced them recently, but I think they're also still available on the Pennsylvania chapter's website. So they haven't been updated since I think 2007, but for all of the history, law, quantitative stuff, the budgeting systems, like all the stuff that you need to know that doesn't really change, that's a really good resource for that.
Just Google AICP, there's a ton of stuff.
I would say don't Google because there's so much stuff.
Yeah.
You don't want to be spread out too thin. Yeah. So I actually only used Pennsylvania Notes. It's super crystallized. It has everything you need for free. All the sections are covered. Then you just read that stuff. You make your own flashcards. Don't buy flashcards off of Amazon because you don't remember them if you just buy them. I used different colors for different sections, green for environment, blue for history, etc. So that's really helpful. And yeah, movies. I watched this documentary about, well, not really documentary, I guess, the movie about the first subway in Boston, how people were freaking out because they were scared to go underground because only dead people went underground. And that really stuck with me. Now on the test, I'm going to remember the dates, all the facts about it. You don't have to cram it because there's just too much to cram with just dates, random names you're never going to remember again in your life or see them again. Yeah, I didn't have to pay for any resources. I know that people sometimes start and they freak out because they think they're going in the wrong direction. They end up switching halfway through and starting over, which is just, you have to stick. Sometimes you feel like maybe I'm not doing great on the tests, but just stick through with it. And tests are always, always good. So there are also online flashcards that you can use as a test. You look at it, think about the answer, then you flip it over. So when you run out of tests to do, because there are only so many, use something else. But don't stop practicing tests.
You see, that's why we said earlier, that's like the single hardest question that every person asks is like, where do I study? Where do I start? And there's no right answer. You know, I did, like I said, I did APA, and I remember like, I still do this. I'm at the gym, and I have my AirPods in, and I'm just listening to the lectures from APA. And Planeisen's got a lot of backup info. It's expensive if you buy the books with it. That's the whole thing. So, and I got their one main book that has like all these collections of reading. It's like a $300 book, you know, in addition to the prep. And then you want to make sure you get like the Green Bible. You want to get all these things and reference it. But it's like, there really is no single place to start. And you ask anyone on there, they'll be like, yeah, here, we don't know what to tell you. Because in theory, I guess you're supposed to know it all. So I would say don't let it define you as a planner, because you're not going to know it all, you know. But it's really like follow APA. They're the ones who made the test. They're the ones like follow their outlines, pay attention to the percentages, you know, of the value of each one. And I think who said the start with the law? You said that when you were studying. That's multiple people told me that. That's the memorization part. Everything else is kind of, you'll see it when you get the questions. Do the practice tests. It's not always all the above. Okay, like some people always say if it's all the above, it's that. It's like, no, because every question has all the above when they do that. So just repetitive stuff and find a method that works for you, get the outlines, and just kind of go over that from there. That's, I mean, I think everyone here is in that same boat. Like, we wish we had that answer, but that's like the golden answer in every single prep is where do you start? And you have no idea, so.
Got it, thanks.
The ethics code, you would think that makes sense. Obviously, I'm an ethical person, and it's probably just a question that you would know, but no. They try to trip you up. They'll give you how many topics are on the ethics code, 10 or 11 or 12. So just random stuff that doesn't show how good of a planner you are, just something you have to memorize. So I actually recorded myself reading out the ethics code, and I was driving to work, listening to this stuff. It just kind of stuck with me, again, because it's just something you have to remember without even having to know it for your profession. Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. There's literally questions that don't have anything to do with ethics, but like almost make you, oh, they're testing to see if you actually studied it. You know what I mean? So.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think the last tidbit of information that I'd like to share is that remember, you're not alone, and as we all shared, you have 5 people here that are willing to share with you their experience and be a lifeline to you. I think one of the things that the APA National kind of identifies is that if you are looking for a lifeline, you can contact your section professional development officer. So I'd like to note for those of you in the central section that Carolina is actually your professional development officer, and I know that she's happy to be a lifeline for you. For those of you in the San Diego section, I'm your lifeline, and I know that I have already been used as a lifeline. I'm happy to continue to be your lifeline, whether it's you need coffee at midnight or whether you need to be reminded that you are a good planner, regardless of the outcome of either the application or the exam. I'm happy to be that for you because I know that I needed someone to be there for me, and I was able to rely on our professional development officer. And I think overall, as planners, we're giving and we care. And so I think keep in mind that, you're not alone, that you have tons of resources, tons of information, tons of people willing and happy to help you. So, capitalize on that. And hopefully this gave you sort of a snapshot of what to expect in terms of sitting down and committing to becoming AICP, and note that it's a journey and it has hoops and hurdles in the process. We all have wounds. We're all wounded warriors and can attest to that, but we're also a testament of the fact that if we did it, you can do it too, because anything is possible if you just kind of put together a good plan. So with that, on behalf of the Central and San Diego section of the California chapter of APA, we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.